Mark Rogers TV on the ouster of Will Muschamp at the University of Florida. In our previous video post, we made the case for why Muschamp should have been fired. That wasn't a difficult case to make. Bottom line, 27-20 overall, 17-15 in the SEC. And again, we outlined all the debacles involved in the Will Muschamp tenure at Florida. Not a difficult case to make. Now we will play the role of Will Muschamp apologist. This is a difficult task to take on, but we will do it. Let's keep a few disclaimers in mind when we attack Will Muschamp's tenure at the University of Florida. Keep in mind, number one, Urban Meyer was exceptional at Florida. His coaching tenure there, his records with the 2 national championships, winning over 85% of his games, is among the best coaching accomplishments in the history of college football anywhere over the course of 5 or 6 years. But let's also keep in mind that Urban Meyer's last team at Florida in 2010 went 7-5. Then they won a bowl game over Penn State. But aside from bringing back a pick 6 to clinch that game, 37-24, Penn State was knocking on the door to pull off an upset against Florida. The Gators were that close to going 7-6 in Urban Meyer's final season in Florida. Even with that in mind, they went 8-5 and were not world beaters. And Florida struggled on offense, much like Muschamp's teams have since 2011. Let's also take into consideration that 2012 season. The defense was dominant, and that's what Muschamp has brought to this program, is great defense. The defense has been dominant. Even devastating injuries in 2013 still did not limit this defense from being very effective. But let's look at the 2012 team. 11-1 regular season. The only reason they didn't play for a BCS championship is because the offense turned it over 6 times against Georgia. Okay, blame Muschamp. It's his responsibility. He's to be held accountable, but he doesn't hand off the ball or throw it. They turned it over 6 times. Look at the box score. Georgia-Florida 2012. It's much like the Missouri-Florida game from this year in losing like 40-10 or whatever it was against Missouri this year. Florida dominated that game against Georgia. Aaron Murray could do nothing on offense. The defense dominated, but they turned it over 6 times. They lost 17-9. Otherwise, they would have been playing Notre Dame in the BCS championship game, albeit they would have had to play an Alabama team in the SEC championship game. Now, we can conjecture that Alabama would have been too much for the Gators in the SEC championship game, but they would have been undefeated in that season. They had a top 5 defense, and they did it against possibly the toughest schedule in college football. The SEC East 3 years ago was much better, or 2 years ago was much better than it is today. Plus, they played Johnny football at Texas A&M, and Manziel's Heisman season did not include any accomplishments against that Florida defense in holding him down and winning 20-17. They also beat LSU. They also beat Florida State. They ransacked the Seminoles in Tallahassee 30-20. So this was an impressive run that Florida made. I know it wasn't pretty on offense, but they beat the best schedule in college football in 2012. Again, 11-1 before the debacle in the Sugar Bowl that we outlined in our previous video. And then thirdly, again, the season last year was just torn apart by injuries. Yes, they should have played better. They could have played better. They can't lose to Georgia Southern regardless of who's on the field. They lost 7 consecutive games. You just can't have that at Florida. But if you're going to give the one season bye of a horrible season, look up the legends. They all had them. 4-8 last year for Will Muschamp. Muschamp, yes, that's what they call him many times in Florida. Will Muschamp in going 4-8. Again, the defense was devastated by injury. 8 injuries to key players, including Jeff Driscoll. Say what you will about Driscoll and his lack of moving the football and passing the football well, but he was the guy under center, well, typically in the shotgun, but the guy at quarterback when Florida was winning big games in 2012, mostly by limiting the turnovers, 15 touchdowns, 6 picks, and converting third downs with his legs, and he was not there for most of last season, so they were in bad shape at quarterback in going 4-8. So also keep in mind that despite the horrible record against ranked teams at 5-12, 2-5 against their chief rivals, Florida State and Georgia, Muschamp's latest game against the chief rival just a few weeks ago against Georgia boy, was Florida impressive. They completely manhandled that Georgia team, seemingly playing with little incentive. Look at what they did against Mark Richt's team. The number 2 ranked rush defense in the SEC. Florida ripped them up for 418 rushing yards and beat them down 38-20. So his last rival game, he won big. So this is all I have for Muschamp's defense, is that, again, Urban Meyer was 7-5 his last season at Florida, came this close to going 7-6 with a loss to Penn State in a bowl game, and Muschamp took over a team that was not quite as talented or as well put together as those former Urban Meyer teams. So he didn't take over the dynasty. He took over a 7-5 team. Also, again, that 2012 team was underrated. That was an exceptional team. Defensively, one of the great teams we've seen in the last decade in their performance. And then disclaiming the situation last year with all the injuries in 2013, and then winning a big game against Georgia a couple of weeks ago, a game that it looked like could possibly spare Will Muschamp's job. But after the debacles against South Carolina, and think about how close it is in the coaching ranks, from maintaining a position and retaining a job to being let go. If Florida could just have blocked and protected their kicker and made a field goal to make it a 2-score game, or if they would have just gotten that punt off in the last 40 seconds and they defeated South Carolina, sure, there would have been a lot of people within the administration at the University of Florida that would have wanted to fire Will Muschamp, but they weren't going to fire him after defeating South Carolina. They weren't going to fire him coming off a win. They were that close to winning that game, and they would not have fired Will Muschamp, and they would have still been in the running for an SEC Eastern Division championship, despite all the issues and all the struggles this year, still mathematically in it, considering what happened yesterday in the SEC Eastern Division. That said, it is what it is. Muschamp out at Florida. Would love to hear from you, Florida fans, on your thoughts on Will Muschamp's tenure. Is there anybody out there who believes this guy should have retained his job? Would love to hear from you, especially right here on Mark Rogers TV.